People from different generations are working at the same place at the same time, all trying to contribute to the same mission. 4 to 5 generations exist in the workplace in significant numbers, but not just in the workplace. Think of our volunteers, vendors, and even suppliers. Different values, experiences, styles, and activities can sometimes create misunderstandings and frustrations. Everyone has different perspectives on the meaning of employment and how work should be done and what workplaces should be like, all of which add to the potential for conflict. Welcome to the training, Generations in the Workplace. Have you noticed that people of different generations respond differently in the same situations? A goal in this training is to provide a deeper understanding of why people of different age groups tend to think, feel, and act as they do. You'll learn a variety of strategies and techniques for finding common ground for working more effectively, collaboratively, and productively with everyone on your team. To go over the objectives for this training, as you can see on your screen, it is to identify characteristics and gain a better understanding of generations, improve communication and teamwork, accept personal responsibility in working together, and provide tips and suggestions for overcoming generational differences. Pause the training for a few moments to write down on a piece of paper 2 to 3 positive traits and 2 to 3 challenges you can identify for the generation you personally identify with. Keep this list to reference later in the training. Which generation are you? Here are the numbers. Generations can be defined by many different names, and they could have different years that they are identified. This is a list of the identified generations showing the start and end year for the generation and their current age as of today. Each of us is a unique human being. We do not fit perfectly into one mold or one category, nor we exhibit every characteristic commonly associated with our generation. Generations are defined by common values and shared experiences. From 1905 to 1924, there were 56.6 million live births in the United States. Those of the greatest generation grew up during the Great Depression and probably fought World War II. They're also known as the G.I. Joe generation. They are the parents of the baby boomers. This is the first generation to benefit from Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and Aging Network. They grew up in the growth of America, hard work, and hope for the American dream. This generation also suffered through the greatest economic downturn in the world history, the Great Depression. They were named the greatest generation by Tom Brokaw, a famous news broadcaster. Brokaw said that they were the greatest because they fought for what was right, rather than fighting for selfish reasons. They certainly made great sacrifices, fighting to protect people in other countries, from the likes of Hitler, Mussolini, and Japanese kamikaze suicide bombers. The GI generation has a history of great accomplishments. That is why it's also referred to as the greatest generation. They are the builders, organizers, and inventors. They were confident, optimistic, and had high standards for behavior, morality, values, and commitment. Traditionalists are known as the silent generation because children in this era were expected to be seen and not heard. There are those who were born between 1927 and 1946, and the average in the age from 75 to 80 years old in 2018. Most of them have retired from the workforce, and those who remain can be expected to work fewer hours. Traditionalists are generally partners, managers, and senior support staff in the workplace, although some might sign as a part-time administrative staff just to keep busy after retirement. The silent generation brought the strong work ethic of their parents into the factories of industrialized society. They grew up during lean times, including the Great Depression and World War II. They considered work a privilege, and it shows. They're considered the wealthiest generation. Traditionalists believe that if you earn your way through hard work, long, grueling hours in their prime enable them to get ahead in their careers, and they think that others should be able to do the same. This generation believes that promotion and advancement should be a result of tenure and even proven in productivity. They distrust flash-in-the-pan successes, which means that it could happen at once or for a short time, and then not repeated. Adversity doesn't daunt the silent generation. They tend to be determined, willing to go the distance, even if they dig deep into the strength to do so. Again, they survived the Great Depression. Many of them had toughened up and bared down to earning a living in those days to simply survive. They were often forced to take jobs that didn't necessarily appeal to them. They took what work was available, and if it was available, they were grateful for it. You won't find a traditionalist stomping off in a huff and quitting to grab the next available job that comes along. Traditionalists are civic-minded and loyal to their country and to their employers. In fact, they still register as the largest voting population in the United States. The silent generation was taught to respect authority. Conformity and conservatism are prized. They tend to be good team players. They generally don't ruffle feathers and initiate conflict in the workplace, and they like to feel needed. Traditionalists tend to be thrifty. They're not folks who are going to trade their cars in every few years. They diligently maintain what they own to extend the property's lifespan. Traditionalists value old-time morals, safety, security, and consistency. They have more respect for brick-and-mortar education institutions and traditional lecture formats than online, web-based education and training. This generation favors conventional business models in the workplace and the top-down chain of command. Work ethic and reliability are important to them. Those of the silent generation were born during the Great Depression, and their parents were most likely of the lost generation. They grew up expecting a hard life. This was the era when Christmas presents might be an orange or a full meal. They are called the silent generation because as a group they were not loud. They did not protest in Washington, and there were no major wars to protest. The events that we experienced in our youth shape our worldview. These are defining events that shape a generation and bind us together in a way we work and we live our lives. For the traditionalists living as a youth through the Great Depression and the New Deal policies of FDR helped shape their attitudes about work. They learn the value of work and of stability and seek that in life because of these early experiences. They also helped in the war effects as youth and remember their fathers and their other family members going to and returning from World War II. Some also took part in the World War II or the Korean War. Baby boomers are defined as being from the huge population increase that followed World War II and the Great Depression. They grew up in a time of prosperity in the absence of world wars. They are known as the flower children, taking LSD and protesting the war in Vietnam. Unlike their parents who grew up during the Great Depression, boomers became the great consumers. They became famous for spending every dollar they earned. This was the first Western generation to grow up with 2 cars in every garage and a chicken in every pot. Baby boomers generally see the world in black and white when asked about diversity because they were youth during the civil rights movement. They were also shaped by the feminist movement and were the first generation where females moved into the workplace and stayed in the workplace in record numbers. Baby boomers lived during a time of protest and civil obedience over the Vietnam War and the assassination of major political leaders. They also witnessed space travel in their youth and saw man walk on the moon. Space travel represents adventure and unlimited possibilities. Science advances, including vaccines, eliminated diseases. Credit cards were introduced and increased this generation's spending. Televisions became common in the household, and the kids and the adults watched programs like Romper Room, I Love Lucy, The Jack Benny Show, Dragnet, Gunsmoke, and The Rifleman. The baby boomers are extremely hardworking and are workaholics. They're motivated by high positions of prestige and extra benefits that come along. They work hard to achieve their career goals in life, and they define self-worth by their work and professional accomplishments. They often think that Gen X lacks work ethics and commitment to the workplace. They're self-reliant, independent, and confident, and they have a strong belief in individualism. They're dedicated, passionate, and resourceful, and they have a rebellious streak and are not afraid of challenging the prevalent practices. They're open to change and adapt to new things. They often switch careers and are inclined towards starting a business. They avoid too much long-term planning, and they're idealistic and competitive and goal-oriented. They keep a positive attitude in life and change with time. They listen to rock and roll and was the expression of their generational identity. They welcome challenges in life and strive to make a difference. They adapt well to new technology. They're pragmatic and concerned with health and environmental issues, and they enjoy their free time and vacations to the fullest. Another important characteristic is they think themselves as a special generation, so much that they created their own lifestyle by bringing new changes in the society. They were the first people who defined the world in terms of generation. Xers generally fall somewhere in the middle on social and political issues, technology use and ability, and many other major differences between boomers and millennials. Do they text and tweet and love their Ultra HD 4K TVs? Most do. But they also remember using cassette tapes to record music off the radio and VCRs. Having seen so many technological advances growing up, Xers can relate to both before and after, creating a unique understanding and balance. Once highly misunderstood and defined as the slacker generation, Xers have grown into fiercely productive adults who appreciate work-life balance stemming from the latchkey effects of the 80s. They're not afraid of hard work and thrive when learning new skills. They have the ability to interact and understand their coworkers from the boomer and millennial generations, and have no problem communicating effectively with both. It's no wonder that Xers are smoothly transitioning into leadership roles across all corporate industries. Though small in numbers, about 25% of the workforce, Generation X is big in ability and competency. As the baby boomers pass the reins, Xers have the opportunity to bridge the gap between the pre- and post-digital age. It is time to start taking notice because chances are sooner than later your next boss will be of this generation. According to Wikipedia, Generation X was originally called Gen Bust because their birth rate was vastly smaller than the preceding baby boomers. Gen Xers were the first generation to experience the highest level of education in the United States to date. The 1976 Arab oil debacle and the first gas shortages in the United States, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the splitting apart of the Soviet Union, MTV and the rise of disco, China's momentary flirtation with personal freedom, and the tragedy of Tiananmen Square. Generation X has lived in the time of general peacefulness, with the only war being Desert Storm, which lasted only a few months and was over. They saw the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Their idea of space travel is dangerous, as they remember the Space Challenger disaster. They also came of age during the energy crisis and time of layoffs in industries. They're also the PC generation and have basically had computers in their schools and homes through most of their childhood. Don't fit in with Generation X or Generation Y? You could be a Xennial, typically born when the original Star Wars trilogy was released between the years 1977 to 1983. Growing up with many technological advances, they tend to be more comfortable with technology than Generation X. They've also been called the Oregon Trail generation after the game, the Lucky Ones, and the Generation Catalino, after Jared Catalino from My So Cold Life. By the time Xennials were 20 years old, the music industry had changed completely. Instead of buying cassette tapes, you could download songs from Napster. Xennials aren't quite as cynical as the stereotypical Gen Xer, but aren't quite as optimistic as a stereotypical millennial. Xennials may have been hit hardest by the recession because of a combination of student loan debt, job losses, and other factors. The millennials grew up and began their careers in a time when almost every home had an internet connection and a computer, except for in third world countries. In 2008, the largest economic decline happened since the Great Depression, 9/11 terrorist attacks on World Trade Center and on the Pentagon. The effect of the 20 years plus of offshore of American jobs is finally being felt. Enron, energy trading scams, and corporate fraud on a national level. global warming becoming obvious with unusual severe storms, hotter weather, colder weather, and more droughts. President George W. Bush, Rumsfeld, and Dick Cheney deceived the entire nation about the weapons of mass destruction of the nuclear and biological type and the subsequent invasion and occupation of Iraq. The explosive growth in online companies such as Google, Facebook, Salesforce.com, LinkedIn, eBay, and PayPal. The revolution in the way we work, including widespan acceptance of flex time, working from home, and freelancing. The U.S. is divided 50-50 with different and opposite fundamental beliefs and values. Way too many people are shooting their fellow Americans with weapons of rapid destruction, and housing prices going beyond most young people's reach. Generation Y consider themselves multitaskers, and they're extremely accepting of diversity. They're more idealistic than any other new youth cohort since the first wave of baby boomers came of age in the 60s. However, they're highly skeptical, of times cynical, and often distrustful of corporate America. They are more concerned about the well-being of the planet, humankind, and their communities than most older cohorts were in their 20s. Because they're used to acquiring information so quickly, they can sometimes come across as know-it-alls to the other generations. While Gen Xers were the great unsupervised generation, Gen Y is said to be the great oversupervised generation. Determined to create a generation of super children, many parents have accelerated their childhoods in some ways, typically used to being guided, directed, supported, coached, protected, nurtured, scheduled, measured, medicated, accommodated, awarded, and rewarded. Everyone is a winner. Their feelings are just as valid or important as anyone else's, and there's no wrong answer. Raised to respect test scores and benchmarks as a way to measure their success or worthiness can be very competitive in this regard. Generation Z, or iGen, were born between 1995 and 2012. This generation is more tolerant of others, different cultures, sex orientation, and races. They're more cautious and less risk-taking, less drinking and drug-taking in high school, and less likely to go to church. More likely to think of themselves and not believe in authority figures in church or government. Delaying having serious romantic relationships, less teen pregnancy, fewer runaways, delaying driving, and fewer teen driving accidents, less time spent in shopping malls, and less likely to go see a movie, more likely to use Instagram than Facebook. On the potential negative side, iGens are known for less in-person and face-to-face contact with others due to being connected with their smartphones. Generation Z is also known for heavy use of gaming, less reading of books and newspapers. They grew up supervised, more protected than the previous generations, less experience with teen jobs and earning money in high school. They may stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning using their smartphone or social media, and possibly more depressed than the prior generations. They feel lonely and not needed, and possibly a higher suicide rate. In 2019, Gen Z will represent more than 20% of the workforce. By 2020, they will account for 40% of all consumers. Gen Z is smarter with money than millennials. 12% are already saving for retirement, and 21% had a savings account before the age of 10. Generation Z is shaping up to be a true throwback generation. 77% currently earn their own spending money through freelance work, a part-time job, or earned allowance. Gen Z is primed to become more influential than millennials. Their practical and physically conservative behavior is making them part of businesses and our economy even at the young age. The Center for Generational Kinetics, the state of Gen Z, completed a study in 2017. You can see on their screen some of the statistics that they discovered. 40% drop in teen birth rates, 38% drop in teen abuse of drugs and alcohol, and 28% drop in teen failure to graduate on time. Have you heard any of these statements, or perhaps you're guilty of saying one of these statements before? Many social groups experience generational conflict. Older leaders have a hard time understanding and therefore trusting younger ones who are anxious to find their role in leadership. The latter often can't understand why older leaders believe and do what they do, and their questioning may lead to conflict. Most of this tension results from generational differences that exist because of contrasting values. We make choices and decisions based on our value system, and differing values often lead to misunderstandings and misinterpretations. This in turn hampers our relationships and lessens the effectiveness of our relationships together. Oftentimes you're finding that you're making one of the comments mentioned previously, or even thinking it. This could lead to generational conflict. Let's first define what generational conflict or generational gap is. What is the difference between the two, or are they harmonious? A generational gap is a difference of opinions between one generation and another regarding beliefs, politics, or values. They are caused by increased life expectancy, rapid changes in society, and the mobility of society. Think about the changes that you have occurred over the past 20 years. Many individuals are struggling to keep up with the technological advances. This also moves into increased ability. Due to YouTube or other applications, one is able to experience and are influenced by other cultures by watching television and music. Access to other cultures was at one time very limited. However, the increasing advances in technology, people have been able to experience other cultures. Generational conflict. Generational conflict is typically about power and control, and not about the generation. Conflicts that appear to be generational are often about who has the power to call the shots, and who must obey. This is not something new, but perhaps now being more openly discussed. Generational differences becomes a catch-all term for a variety of differences. Conflict among people of different generations is common at work, lowering productivity and engagement. Then tensions are created, often attributing to generational differences. But research has found this not true. What is true is more people are working later in life, creating a significant gap in age for those working together. You may immediately notice differences in the way they dress, music preferences, how they use technology, and how they communicate. Different attitudes about the workplace and behaviors reflect the era during which they grew up, but also because of the different life stages and career stages. On the screen in Figure 1 is what is referred to as major life changes, including single, unattached, attached, and caregiving. Figure 2 shows major career stages, including stages 1 through 5. Our life stage and career stage affect what we want, expect, and need to be happy and productive at work. If you think about the millennials' communication, they may be more apt to utilizing texting, instant messaging, and social media to communicate. Gen Xers more likely to use their phones and email. Having these differences can and often will lead to conflicts with their peers. The differences in communication can lead to conflict, but preferences do shift over time for all generations. If you take a look at the Facebook's user base, it now includes majority of the United States population, and older users today, the fastest growing group. In the workplace, Gen Xers adopted a tool many of us use today, email, and it's being used by all generations at work. You can learn more about workplace conflict and the training generational conflicts in the workplace available online through the Employee Development Center.